Hey! Welcome to another Sprite review, and yes, of course it is another handheld released by Anbernic to add to the immersive amount that is already out. But this time is a little bit personal for me, being that it is taking complete influence from one of my favourite consoles ever released. They call this the ARC-D. Let's get straight into the unboxing to see what you get with your purchase. They've gone with an actual design with a picture of the handheld at the front with a gloss finish, which is better than their bland and visual pleasing plain white box with just some font. Nothing else is going on here, just the colour variant that I've got of this handheld. Let's crack this open. Oh, it does help if I got this the right way around. This is already looking pretty big, while coming from my previous Anbernic experience. Let's put this big boy aside for now. We also have our generic USB-C charging cable for charging and also data transferring. And under this we do have our handy screen wipes and welcoming screen protector, always nice to see. Oh, and the manual. And guys, I know if you're like me, you just want to skip this borrowing bit and just get straight into this handheld, but my advice is have a good look at this or put this aside, because it does have some handy features to let you know with the OS function shortkeys and the online multiplayer setup. Now let's look into this tasty handheld, a design that I've personally been looking after for quite a long time. My first impression is that I really like the size of this handheld. I believe it may be one of their first handhelds with a 4-inch screen, but it is a bit on the heavier side than a lot of their previous releases. But just to quickly shout out, unlike other YouTubers out there reviewing these handhelds, Anbernic themselves send these out for review purposes. But for me, unlike every other handheld, I've been buying this with my own money just to review for you guys, so I do hope that you enjoy. You can always just show your support by leaving your comments below, or even just checking out the right Sprite web store. The links are in the description box below. I can already tell with this handheld will take me a while to get used to with the size of this and these buttons, but it is feeling pretty great, and these buttons are more suited to what you would find on a traditional gaming console controller, something I've been after personally on a handheld for quite a long time. At the base of this handheld you have something that looks like a very small reset switch, something in common as you find on the back of a PlayStation 4 controller or PlayStation 5. Be interesting to find out what this is later on. Then we got the one SD slot that reads as the main master drive, so then you can load your OS. That is nicely positioned headphones jack as well, which is great, and then you have a second SD slot to expand your storage. The plastic build has a smooth feel, and we do have that glossy finish bordering around the D-pad and inside the front facing buttons, with a very small power indicator just above the Z button. At the back of this device we do have those borders for your fingers to sit in, just like the original Sega Saturn controller. A closer look at the trigger buttons, they do have a slight firm press with a medium travel, with the back triggers as well having a slightly more over medium travel. They do feel great, but they are quite firm for now, but I'm sure after some long use they will get better and easier to press down. Next to the right hand side of the triggers we do have the small micro switches for the volume button and the function trigger. Really wish this function button was placed on the front facing of this handheld. Next to this then we do have a small HDMI port, which I do prefer over the micro as this is just built more sturdy. Next up then is two USB-C connectors. One is dedicated for the power cable and the other is for OTG support, so we can get those fancy peripherals and wired controllers all hooked up here. For a greater understanding of this handheld, I thought let's compare this to the original Sega Saturn controller. Well, this is more compared to the Model 2 that came out, as the first model of the Saturn controller did look even more different, which personally is my favourite controller to go to for 2D side-scrolling games. First off, I'm really impressed with the colouring. They're pretty smack on with each other. These buttons are all rubber membrane just like the original, but I will say the original has a slightly less travel and they are slightly ever so bigger. When it comes to the X, Y and Z button, they are pretty much the same size, but the OG have a more of a rounded build and have better imprints to really make that font stand out. Let's head into one of the most important factors when it comes to 2D gaming, which is the D-pad. This is definitely smaller than the original controller and does not have that slight grip texture as well. It has slightly more travel than the original controller, but I have to say it's not bad, it's just not as good as the original. And I would say it's definitely better than a lot of other D-pads on the previous released handhelds. And on the ARC-D, the D-pad seems to be a bit raised, like on a small pedestal, which is just unlike the original. The start and select button are designed just like the original, but they are quite smaller and they are built with a plastic finish, unlike the original having a rubber texture. The triggers are completely different when you compare this to the original controller, as they were triggered with a micro switch with having minimal travel. The Saturn controller is also built with a slight imprinted grip just around the edges, with a glossy style finish at the front facing part of this controller, with the ARC-D just having a complete plastic finish. Next up is a quick size comparison with Anbernic's previous release of the RG35XX, a very popular handheld. As you can see, it is pretty on the big side, and this is also compared to the latest Retroid Pocket 2S, two handhelds which I would say are definitely more pocket friendly. With any new handhelds, I always recommend putting on your screen protectors first, just in case something happens. But whilst I'll do this, let's go through the models and variants that you can get. This is the ARC-D model that has two variants, being one of the Sega Saturn White and the Mega Drive Black and Grey model. It's a shame they did not use the red colour start and select button for the Mega Drive, just like the Power Release console. That would have been pretty cool. The other model is called the ARC-S, having a groovy looking transparent black model as well as a transparent purple model. So what's the difference between this ARC-D and the ARC-S model that is now available? To put it very simple, there's just very minor hardware spec differences. The ARC-S just has Linux OS compatibility, with the ARC-D being able to run Android as well, being that version of version 11. The ARC-S has no touchscreen capability. The ARC-S model also comes with 1GB of RAM compared to the ARC-D coming with 2GB. The built-in memory is slightly faster as well, with a TFEMMC 32GB, with the ARC-D having 16GB of TF built in. When it comes to the specs of this handheld, it's not really raising the flag of being the most powerful handheld Anbernic is delivering at the moment. But this could be just enough for you to get your retro gaming fix on the go, with the CPU being very similar to the previous releases, with an RK3566 quad-core 64-bit, with the processor going up to 1.8 GHz. The RAM is pretty fast as well, which has an LPDDR4. The storage as well is pretty fast, and there's plenty enough room to get your retro gamers on with 32GB built in. You can also opt to get 128GB of an SD card compatible with over 4,500 games, plenty enough to choose from. It's also got a 2.45 GHz Wi-Fi, which is pretty handy as well to get those retro achievements and play these retro titles online. It also has Bluetooth 4.2, which is plenty enough of speed to connect your PlayStation 5, the Xbox One Series S controllers all up. The speakers as well is a high quality double horn stereo speaker. Never really heard of a double horn before. Here is a quick example. The battery is a 3500 milliamps battery. That is stated about 6 hours, but I'm guessing, depending on the titles that you are playing, if they are more demanding, you're going to get about 4 hours of gameplay on this. With the expandable SD card slot, you can have up to 512GB of storage, which is pretty awesome, and I'm sure you can mostly get Sega Saturn collection on here if it's actually capable of playing, which I'll show you later on in this video. With the systems that I tested, when it came to the 6th generation console, the Dreamcast was its limit, even though on the Android OS it still was struggling on some titles, but they were working better on the Linux OS. But I wouldn't use this handheld with the intention of getting full decent Dreamcast emulation. Another test I always like to do with these handheld is booting up some Street Fighter to see how well it pulls off its Hadoukens and Shoryukens. And I have to say, this input is pretty awesome and is the easiest I've experienced with any handheld. But with that reach to the bumper buttons and the travel distance, it wasn't too long before I was getting a little bit of a handache. For an understanding of the screen quality, the RGXX is one of my favourite handhelds with a bright full viewing angle with vibrant, well balanced colours. Comparing it to the ARC-D, it is better than other handhelds I've experienced, but it's just not quite cutting it, just like the RGXX. My personal favourite features when it comes to handheld gaming is a video output. Though you will need a micro to HDMI connector, purchased separately, a link is below if you are interested. When testing this on Android, it just was not playing nice at all. With a fixed portrait side view, with force portrait mode as well selected, it just wasn't having the correct aspect ratio, so I couldn't really advise getting decent video output when using Android. I even tried finding something within the video settings. The only thing I could really change was the resolution. I also tried this on my main TV and I was still having the same problem. But booting this up with the Linux OS, the output is fixed with the widescreen ratio automatically applied, which is great, and it's the first I've seen from one of these handhelds having a widescreen ratio with this output, when the handheld is designed with a 4:3 ratio. Personally, I'm not a fan of these bezels on the side. Let's get rid of these. And this should do the job. That's better. The default video resolution output when using Linux is set to 720p. But I can't see why not it would be 1080p. This is more capable of holding a higher resolution. Now here is some of my setting up experiences. With the SD card already inserted, it will automatically boot up into the Linux OS, which is a custom OS much like Boctora or Emulation Station, which is pretty great if you want to jump straight into retro gaming on the go. This is a Anbernic custom built, and of course I'm sure it won't be too long before the community get behind and creating their own OS. It is very simple to get around, with RetroArc being this landing icon, also extras like apps, favorites and standalone emulator section with plenty of options to choose from and tweak. It can either be a very simple experience or a complex one if you wish to dwell and get the best experience. Remember, with Linux OS, it has its own function shortcuts, and it's always best to turn off via the settings. When removing the SD card, it will then boot straight into Android, which is my personal go-to. The initial setup is very straightforward. As always with Anbernic, it's built in with a lot of essential emulators and apps to get you up and running. Our drop-down menu has one brand new icon, which is pretty nice to see, which has a Sega button mode switch, or then to switch it to switch mode. And packed with all the other goodies that has been released with the previous handhelds by Anbernic. Let's quickly check to see if all the buttons are in all good working order. Oh wait, yeah, no L3 and R3 button here. As stated, this is packed with 32GB of onboard storage, with the Android OS taking a heavy 10GB of that up already. It's always best to connect this up online to get the most recent updates of these apps, and some of these always need a bit of tweaking. So prepare yourself for a bit of time taken on setting this all up. When launching the game mode function via the drop down menu, you're home to Anbernic's custom front end launcher, and it's nice to see that they have applied some improvements from the previous handhelds. It's been a while for me to actually dwell into this, as my main front end on Android I go to is the Disho app, which I've done a video on that. If you'd like to check that out, of course the link is in the description box below. I have also done videos in the past regarding how to set up your dedicated emulate handhelds, but if you'd like me to create a new one, setting up your brand new Anbernic, you can just leave a lovely little comment in the section below as well. But now last and not least, can it actually play Sega Saturn games? Now, it was very questionable because of the hardware specs that 2GB of RAM could just be a little bit undercutting, but the processor speed should be alright. But testing this on Android, I didn't really get the best results, but booting this up on Linux and using my Saturn games via that way, I did find an improvement. Now, with the titles that I tested for the Saturn, they seemed to run pretty steady with a nice 60 frames, but there were quite a fair bit of dips here and there, not really spoiling the gameplay. I have experienced better emulation performances with handhelds with that extra gigabyte of RAM, so it's a shame that they didn't pack this with more RAM. All in all, it is a nice steady experience playing Saturn games, but I wouldn't dedicate it as 100% compatibility with 60 frames all the way through. And of course, you are capped by the emulator performance as well. So all in all, it's great to see Anbernic showing their support with Sega consoles, and it's one of my favourite type of builds. I personally think that it's awesome that Anbernic is showing the great influences from Sega consoles. I would have bought all the type of variants because of it being one of my favourite consoles ever released, but I best not because they don't send me these for review purposes, and the funds will have to go for these up and coming releases by Anbernic. So as stated before, there's some tweaks I would recommend to get this more closer to the original hardware, and that lack of RAM does really not help it run in Sega Saturn games, unfortunately. But thanks for watching, and always, if you like that video, hit that button. If you want support, click subscribe, leave your comments below, and I hope to catch you lot on my next video.